We walked hundreds of kilometers. We had very little sleep. It was the middle of winter in the UK. We had no sleeping bags. The only food they gave us in 10 days was a chicken between 4 people, and it was alive when we got it.
Welcome to the New Age Sage podcast, where you come to free your mind from all the things that keep you in suffering. Today's guest is Paul Taylor. It's such a powerful episode because we teach you how to handle stress, overcome it, and turn it into a way to develop a powerful character. You're going to love it. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Paul, welcome on the show.
Thank you for having me, Lucas. Great to be here.
So I see you're about to release a book about the dangers of modern life. I often go on rants about how much of pussies we've become in this modern world, so I'd love to hear you tell your reasoning as to why you believe that, why modern life is making us more weak.
Yeah, so the book's actually been released, and it's called Death by Comfort: Why Modern Life is Killing Us and What We Need to Do About It. And so the basic principle for the book is that the human genome has not changed in over 45,000 years. Mm-hmm. So we have this hunter-gatherer's genome that actually requires and expects us to do certain things for it to function normally. So those things are to move heaps, absolutely lots and lots of movement. It is absolutely foundational, and we can go into the reasons for that. But also to be eating real food. And to be exposed to certain stressors and then recover, to be highly socially connected. Mm-hmm. But now, if you look at this modern life, we don't move very much at all. People sit on their arses most of the day. Yeah. Most of the food that we eat is ultra processed shit. Mm-hmm. We tend to avoid psychological discomfort, and we are digitally very connected, but socially very disconnected. And I believe that those things are what's driving modern illnesses, so both physical and mental illnesses, because we are not living the life that our genome expects us to.
Super interesting. I completely agree. In terms of movement, what's the quota? Like, how much movement should we actually be getting to satiate that need?
So that's really interesting, right? And if anybody's got a tracking device, right? The magic number in terms of steps is 10,000 steps a day, right? All around the world, people are saying, "Oh, if I get my 10,000 steps, then I'm good." And one day I thought, well, where does this actually come from? So I dug into the research, and you know where it comes from? A marketing campaign for a Japanese pedometer company in the 1960s. Wow. Bugger all research behind it whatsoever, right? Yeah. But for me, the argument has now been put to bed, because there was a bunch of Harvard researchers led by a guy called Hernan Ponzer, and they went and studied one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth, right? These guys are called the Hadza. They live in Tanzania in East Africa, and 90% of all of the food that they eat today, they get from hunting and gathering. Mm-hmm. So this is the best snapshot into how much we should be moving with this hunter-gatherer genome. And what these Harvard researchers did is they put physical activity trackers on them and heart rate monitors, right? And that's important for a reason I'll get into in a second. But and they studied everyone from 15-year-olds up to 60-year-olds, half men, half women, and they looked at them for 2-week periods 4 times during the year, so 8 weeks in total, because they wanted to see how much they move in the wet season and the dry season and all of that. But anyway, so it averaged out that Hadza women took about 13,500 steps a day, and Hadza men 18,500 steps a day, right? Now, the average American, the average Australian, the average Brit takes about 5,000 steps a day, right? So they're doing triple what we were doing. But then they looked at their heart rate monitors and the intensity of the activity. And this is really, really important, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can do your 10,000 steps and be walking slowly versus somebody who's doing sprint training in those 10,000 steps. And it's a very different outcome, right? Yeah. So, and you look at all the government guidelines, they talk about moderate and vigorous physical activity. And the recommendations in your country is the same as here. it's a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week, or 75 minutes of vigorous spread over the week. The Hadza, it turns out, do 135 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity every single day. That's 945 a week. That is about 7 times the amount of the average American or the average Australian. And the reason that this is really important is that exercise actually controls gene expression, right? It actually affects how your genes are switched on. When we exercise, it releases these things called myokines, these chemicals that get into your brain and all your organs and make them function really, really well. So the snapshot is we are not moving anywhere near as much as we should be moving, that 3 to 7 times the amount. That's what hunter-gatherers actually move.
Yeah, what's the danger of not doing that? Like, what's the danger of, from like a health perspective, brain perspective, of not getting that movement in?
How long have you got for me to answer this question? It's a great question, because there was a really cool research paper released by these world-class exercise physiologists that showed that exercise can prevent or treat 26 of the most common chronic diseases that we suffer from. So the danger is when you're not exercising, it massively impacts your biology in both your body and your brain, right? So these myokines that I talked about are these really important chemicals that are released in your body that make your heart function better, your kidney, your liver, and all of your organs function better. And they really make your brain function better. They release or trigger the release of a whole host of neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, endocannabinoids, endorphins, which most people have heard of endorphins. But every time you exercise, there's this like, it's like an orchestra of neurotransmitters that are released in your brain that makes your brain function better. So by not moving, we're actually destroying our biology bit by bit. The human genome is built on movement. That is the critical thing. So if you take that away, all your entire biology actually suffers. Your gene expression changes, and you get much more chronic diseases.
Wow, that's some serious shit. I'm always curious about if we go into the minds of people who just are called not to do that, right? Like me and you, we look like fit people. I have in me, it's like I have to do it, whether it's just like a couple kettlebell movements with work, like I just have to do it. I'm curious what you think about people who just get in the habit of not doing it, people who just don't feel the need to do it, who get accustomed to not living in that space. Why do you think so many of us are in that space, or just not feeling the need to exercise? And how can we start moving away from that?
Great question again. One of the reasons is it can be uncomfortable, right? When you're exercising, particularly if you're not used to it, it's actually a discomfort. It's a type of stress. But here's the thing: exercise is really good for you because it's a stressor, right? It stresses out. So if you're to go for a run, or I'm to go for a run, it stresses out your cardiovascular system. If you're swinging kettlebells, which I'm a big fan of, right, or doing any type of resistance training, it's a mechanical stress on your muscles and your bones, and your body actually adapts to that, right? But it can be uncomfortable, and then people just get into a bit of a rut. If they're not exercising, here's what happens. When you don't exercise, your energy levels drop. Your motivation drops, because motivation is all about a chemical called dopamine in the brain, which is actually triggered by exercise. So when you're not exercising, you're actually depriving your brains of the chemicals that it needs to function well, right? So then people can just have low mental energy, right? So then they don't have a desire, they don't have the motivation to exercise. And here's the thing that I always say: we have it arse about face when it comes to motivation. That, like, most people sit and are waiting for the motivation fairy to come along and give them a dollop of motivation so they can sort their shit out, right? Yeah. But motivation follows action. this is really important for people to understand. When you take action, whether it's around physical exercise or you're taking action towards a goal that you have, it releases dopamine in the brain. The brain, knowing that I'm in forwards movement, knowing that Lucas has got up today and has actually done a workout, or he's done some stuff, some mental work towards his goal, that actually releases dopamine that makes you want to do more. So by not exercising, you're actually lowering the drive in your brain. You also completely change your biology, and you just become a bit bleh, right? Yeah. A bit lethargic in both the body and the brain, right? Now, what do we do about it? I mean, that is the massive question, because if your listeners are sitting going, well, God, I haven't exercised in so long, like, where do I even start? And that can be a barrier. You know, if somebody is really unfit, that can be a massive barrier for them starting. But if somebody hasn't exercised for a long time, I actually love training these people, because I say to them, anything that you do, any amount of exercise that you do is going to move the needle, right? Yeah. For people who haven't exercised, they have a huge, what I call, window of adaptation. So for them to get fitter and start to feel the results doesn't take very much exercise. For me or you to increase our levels of fitness or strength takes a lot more, because as you train more, your window of adaptation gets smaller, right? And here's the message that we need to give to people. There was a massive study that was published in a journal of the American Medical Association, where they took a bunch of people in their 50s, around my age, and they measured their cardiovascular fitness, and then they tracked them over the next 15 years. Mm-hmm. And they showed that the people who were the highest in fitness had only a 20% risk of dying in the next 15 years as the people who were the lowest amount of fitness, right? Yeah. So if we flip that the other way, being really unfit, a 5-fold increased risk of death in the next 15 years. Yeah. But what they did is they looked at every category of fitness, and they found that by moving from the lowest level of fitness to below average, actually reduced the risk of death in the next 15 years by 95%, right? Yeah, that is better than...
I know that, you believe that motivation is bullshit. And I agree in many ways, but what you just said to me is the best motivation, right? If I'm ever facing the demon of resistance telling me, don't work out today, don't do this, I think about those things, right? Like, my health is dependent on this. My mental health is dependent on this. Just feeling that reality, tapping into that, makes me want to go even harder. Just makes me want to do it, to show for my health and to give myself a better headspace. That's what I kind of use to get there. I'm like, all right, I have to do this for my health, for my mental health. That kind of gets me going most of the time.
And Lucas, you have just distilled 20 years of exercise psychology right there, right? And this is what I say to people. Don't think about exercise as losing weight or as, I don't want to exercise because my dad, or I do want to exercise because my dad died of heart disease and I don't want to die of disease. Like, that's way too far into the future. I always say to people, how does it make you feel? Right? That's the really important thing. I know, and most of your listeners know, that when you exercise, you feel better. Why do you feel better? Because all of those beautiful chemicals are released in your brain. So that's what I say to people, is to focus on how you feel, to focus on, well, if I don't exercise, I'm going to have lower energy, I'm going to feel shit, and my diet is going to be worse. And there's reasons for that, which we can get into later on. But when I do exercise, I actually feel better. I'm a better person with my kids. I'm a better person interacting with other people. And here's the beautiful thing, that for the people who are listening, if they're really unfit, like, just moving from the lowest to the below average category reduces your risk of death by 95%. Like, that's a brilliant message to give to people. Yeah. And this is what I say, every little thing counts. You mentioned earlier on swinging around kettlebells, right? I'm a big fan of every half hour or so, I get off my arse, off the desk, and I do some kettlebell swings or some other, what I call, little movement snacks. Now, the research shows that if you do that regularly, it is actually really good for your longevity. But if we think about it, every time you get up and you do 30 seconds or a minute of movement, you just fire up your whole metabolism, right? You're burning up stress hormones. So if you're having a stressful day, just doing 30 seconds to a minute of intense exercise will burn up those stress hormones. It will release those positive neurotransmitters in your brain, and it'll actually make you feel better, and it'll lift your energy. So you gain energy by doing these little bite-sized chunks of exercise. And I think that's really important for the listeners to understand, is that every single bit that you do counts. Yeah. Everything counts. So I always say to people, on the days where you feel shit out and you don't feel like you've got any motivation to exercise, just do something, right? Just go, can I do a couple of minutes? Yes, I can do that. And you'll probably find that will then lift your energy and you can do a little bit more later on.
Yeah, completely agree. I think in this discussion, you're emphasizing the concept of good stress. What I want to talk about now is what's the difference between a good stress and a bad stress? How can we differentiate that?
Yeah. So let's get a bit sciencey, right? Yeah. The bad stress that everybody talks. So if we do say stress, most people automatically go to bad, right? Yeah. And that is distress, right? And the good stress, us physiologists call eustress. This is stress that actually builds you, makes you better, right? Now, exercise is a good stress, right? It is a stress that actually makes us bigger, faster, stronger. And here's the thing. Whether or not a stress is good for you, a lot of it actually depends on your perception, right? If I view something as threatening or stressful, it actually activates a whole different part of my nervous system than if I view it as a challenge or something that will build me, right? So that's one thing to understand. Now, if we look at good stress and bad stress in general, exercise is generally a good stress, but it's also about the volume, the intensity, and the duration. So any of those stressors, right? So for psychological stress, it can be good for you to get out of your comfort zone, right? So you just think of something that you have done that you are super proud of, right? And I'd like all of your listeners to think of something in your life that you're massively, massively proud of that you accomplished. I guarantee you, for the vast majority of people, it involves stress and being out of your comfort zone, in order that you adapted and actually achieved that thing. And so that is the type of stress that is actually beneficial for us. Other things that are beneficial, cold exposure and heat exposure, right? Yep. But all of these things are what I call hormetic stressors. And let me just define that, because it's important to understand. Hormesis is this branch of science that is described by sublethal exposures to stressors or toxins, which at high levels can kill you, at low to moderate levels induce stress resistance, right? So exercise is awesome for you, but if you are an ultra endurance athlete, it's actually starts to be bad for you, right? Yeah. Cold exposure, doing 30 seconds of a cold shower, doing a couple of minutes in an ice bath, if you want to go to the extreme, those things are really, really good for you. But if you're to stay in that ice bath for 2 hours, you get hypothermia and you'll die, right? Yeah. Heat exposure, we know that being in a sauna for 20 to 30 minutes actually does lots of really good things for your biology. But if you stay in that sauna for hours, you're going to die, right? Yeah. So, and it's the same with psychological stress, right? Something that is psychologically stressful can actually build my capacity when I overcome it. But if you were to put me under psychological stress continuously for months, it can actually destroy my brain and create PTSD and all of those things. So it's really about the intensity, the duration of that stress. And then on the other side, how am I recovering, right? That's really important, particularly if you've had a stressful day. What's your recovery like? Like coming home and smashing 6 beers and watching Netflix is not recovery, it's relaxation, right? So it's that balance between stress and recovery. And with stress, it's Goldilocks. The whole Goldilocks and the 3 bears. You remember that story? Mm-hmm. And it can't be too little. It can't be too much. It's got to be just right. That's the key thing around stress.
So take me through your mindset. Let's say you're facing a new stressor psychologically. You're entering a new space of the unknown. Threats are coming up in terms of to your emotional safety. Take me through your process mentally of how you face those moments.
So in order to do this, and again, it's a great question. I like to talk about the voices in your head, right?
Mhm.
So for all the listeners, I know some people have got a shitload of voices in their heads, right?
Yeah.
But I would just want to talk about the two extremes, right? So we can all relate to a version of us that's a little bit shit, right?
Mhm.
That low motivation, whiny little voice in our head. This is what I call your gremlin, right? And everybody's got a gremlin, right? And it's driven by sort of that negative mindset, negative self-talk, being a friggin' victim. Why is this happening to me? All of this sort of stuff is what I call your gremlin. And lots of people would like to get rid of their gremlin. But for me, there's three modalities that I'm a big fan of that are really important to discuss here. One is Stoic philosophy. So the ancient Stoics from Greece, ancient Greece and Rome, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, the Seneca, these sorts of guys, right? The next modality is Japanese psychology. And the third is something called acceptance commitment therapy.
Mhm.
Now, these are all really useful strategies around our mindset. All of them say this is not about getting rid of that negative voice in your head, because we just can't.
Yeah.
Experiencing negative emotions is a part of the human experience, but it's about where you focus your attention,
Yeah.
right? And when that little negative voice comes up in your head, when you pay attention to it, you're actually committing brain cells to it. So it's strengthening that in your brain. So all these three modalities say that when you have this negativity going on, it's about shifting your attention, right? In Japanese psychology, they say the most important thing in your life is the flashlight of your attention, that we can control that flashlight. And it's really important, that flashlight in your head. So when you're faced with that negativity, that negative voice, the gremlin in your head, the Stoic philosophers say the best thing is to consult your inner sage, right? And it's quite pertinent that we're talking about the New Age sage, right? So the sage that the Stoic philosophers talked about is this is the best version of you, right? And if you look back at Chinese ancient philosophy, Lao Tzu and Confucius, they talked about consulting your sage as well, that wise sage. So I encourage people to do a little exercise, and I'll send you through so you can share with your listeners a little exercise to create their gremlin and their sage, right? And they both got to have a name. That's really, really important.
Yeah.
And you write down the character strengths. So your sage, when I say to people, create your sage, is what are the character strengths that you have when you're at your absolute best, right? And you write down a list of those character strengths, right? And this isn't a time to be humble. You write all those character strengths down that when you're at your best. And then I like to get people to do a couple of plus ones. So I may have hung out with you for a long time, and I might think, I really like the way that Lucas is calm under pressure, or that he has lots of empathy or something like that. And I'm actually going to write down my sage is calm under pressure, right? So these are what I call the plus ones. You're going to create the best version of you, and then you're going to give it a little sprinkling of steroids, right? You're going to create this super you, this sage. And when you're struggling, the questions you ask yourself is, what would my sage do right now? Or what actions would I take to express the characteristics of my sage, right? Now, both of those questions are a technique in psychology called self-distancing, that by creating a distance between you and the situation, by consulting a sage and saying, well, what would they do? That creates this emotional distance, and it reduces the intensity of the negative emotions that you feel, and actually increases your courage and helps you to make better choices. So
Yeah.
I always say to people, the first thing you got to do is you got to create this gremlin in Sage. And I actually get the clients that I work with to draw the gremlin in Sage, and they need a name. And when that negative shit comes into your head, you just say to yourself, gremlin, there you are. Thanks for that story that you're telling me, but it's not helpful right now. Yeah. And that's where you ask your Sage what you should do. So this is a really, really useful technique. And the more people practice this, the easier it becomes. Like, you show me a world-class athlete, I'll show you somebody who does that mental visualization, right? So this is just a technique that world-class athletes all around the world use, and it's really effective.
I want you to take me to some of the hardest moments in your life where you've had to consult the Sage and shut down the gremlin. What's a moment or two where it's been maybe a make or break situation, life or death, where you've had to put those skills to work and make a life saving or massive decision with that philosophy?
Yeah, awesome question, right? What's the practical application? So I'll give you two quick examples. One was 25 years ago now, when I went through combat survival and resistance to interrogation training in the military, which was 10 days of pretty hardcore shit that they can't do anymore because of health and safety reasons, right? In those 10 days, they thrashed us physically. We walked hundreds of kilometers. We had very little sleep. It was the middle of winter in the UK. We had no sleeping bags. The only food they gave us in 10 days was a chicken between 4 people, and it was alive when we got it. We got hunted by a hunter force for 5 days. And then we got interrogated for 12 hours afterwards. And we were in stress positions the whole time. We weren't interrogated. We had white noise. Do you know white noise? That when the radio's off station, that was playing the whole time at the volume you'd hear music in a nightclub. And we were hooted in these stress positions and interrogated. And it was pretty friggin' awful. And that was one time that I really had to use that, right? The other time was actually very recent.
How did you, let's go back to that moment, because it's a pretty crazy story. How did you make it through that with those, like, how did you use that in those moments, in that moment?
Right. So how I got through it, and particularly when we went into the interrogation phase and the stress positions and that whole white noise, like, that was really, really awful. Yeah. And what I did with that is I broke it down to every minute. And I'm just saying to myself, let's just get through the next minute, right? Let's just get through the next minute. And when I was getting interrogated, this is going to stop. Let's just get through that, right? Just telling yourself, this will stop. I just need to get through the next minute. And that's really important, because when you are stressed, really stressed, your brain does this, right? So you get tunnel vision, and it does this temporally, time-wise. It really is not interested in things that are 2 days or weeks away. You've got to focus on something that's really short term. The more the stress, the shorter your focus needs to be. And sometimes you just need to, when it's really stressful, just go, I just need to get through the next minute. And when you get through the next minute, I just need to get through the next minute. So it's breaking it down into those little small moments, right? And calling on those character strengths, right? And using all that positive self-talk that you've got this, right? That it's really about calling on everything that Sage has just to get you through the next minute. And then at the end of that minute, you go, an awesome job. Let's do one more minute. So it's really about breaking it down into that little component parts, right? And that would be my advice.
So I know that not many people are going to find themselves interrogated and tortured. So it's a crazy thing you went through that. I try and make it related to a more practical thing that people go through. That same philosophy can be applied to facing anxiety, facing fear, facing anything that is fucking with you in the moment. Is that perspective of, this will pass. I think that the need to bypass it or resist it creates a suffering, right? That's what creates all these bad habits. Like, if you're facing a trigger, facing fear, facing anxiety, the modern issues we find ourselves in are people perpetually avoiding the sensation through, shitty fucking food, social media,
Yep.
all the bad things. And in my experience, I've noticed that the more I face and have that perspective, if I just get through this now, the next 10 minutes of facing this sensation, being with it and doing what I can in my control to better it, I've lost the resistance and fear of it itself. And whenever it comes again or sensations like that come, it's not a big deal to me. I know I can be present with it. I know I can face it. So that philosophy, even though it's a crazy situation for you, can apply to the most minute of things. I'm going to give you a break to digest all this amazing information. And in this break, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. So I know that not many people are going to find themselves interrogated and tortured. So it's a crazy thing you went through that. I try and make it related to a more practical thing that people go through. That same philosophy can be applied to facing anxiety, facing fear, facing anything that is fucking with you in the moment. Is that perspective of this will pass. I think that the need to bypass it or resist it creates a suffering, right? That's what creates all these bad habits. Like if you're facing a trigger,
Yes.
you're facing fear, facing anxiety, the modern issues we find ourselves in are people perpetually avoiding the sensation through, shitty fucking food, social media,
Yep.
all the bad things. And in my experience, I've noticed that the more I face and have that perspective, if I just get through this now, the next 10 minutes of facing this sensation, being with it and doing what I can in my control to better it, I've lost the resistance and fear of it itself. And whenever it comes again or sensations like that come, it's not a big deal to me. I know I can be present with it. I know I can face it. So that philosophy, even though it's a crazy situation for you, can apply to the most minute of things.
Absolutely, Lucas. And you've hit the nail on the head, right? The best treatment for anxiety is exposure therapy, not drugs, exposure therapy. That gradual exposure where you build it up and you build it up, right? But what's really important for your listeners to understand is that when they do face that little fear, right? And they overcome it and they go, you know what? This is only 10 minutes. I just need to go and get this done, right? And you call on all the character strengths of your sage and you channel your sage and you just get it done. Once they get it done, the really important thing to do is they got to celebrate mentally, massively. And the research shows that you've got to linger on that celebration for about 12 seconds in order for that memory to be embedded in your brain, right?
Yeah.
And that's really important, that when you do it, you go, fucking yes, I just nailed that. I've done that. That feels bloody awesome. You know, and you just think about your sage getting stronger as you do. That is really important to burn that into people's brains.
It has to be an effective way to not get traumatized, right? Like that seems like a good perspective to avoid it becoming trauma. I'm assuming
absolutely. And here's I'm going to give it another technique now that you mentioned that, and then I'll come back to the other story around when I've had to use this. So there's a really cool neuroscientist, British neuroscientist called James Gross, and he has taken people with PTSD, right? So whether they be combat veterans or normal people who've got post-traumatic stress disorder, and uses a process called distanced reappraisal. So what basically I like to call it is finding the silver lining. So he will ask them, after a while, they get comfortable with the therapist. There's a whole bit of rapport building. And then they basically would say, so say it was you had the trauma and I'm the therapist, I'd say, once we have this rapport and you're nice and comfortable, I'd be going, okay, so Lucas, tell me about that event, but like you were watching a movie, right? So talk about it in the third person. Like what happened to this individual being you. Because what tends to happen is that when we remember things, we remember it through our own mind's eye, right? So if we're to have this massive fight and I remember it later, I would remember you being angry and your face shouting at me and stuff like that. But when you are describing the movie, it's like you're at the side just looking at this movie. So it's a lot less emotionally intensive, right? And then as they're describing that situation, they say, what was the good that came out of that situation down the track, right? This is this whole idea of hunting for the silver lining. So if some of your listeners are thinking about, something that happened to them 20 years ago that was pretty horrible, or an argument, a massive argument that they had, or even the death of a loved one, right? Let's take it extreme.
Yep.
People go to me, where the hell is the silver lining in one of my loved ones dying? Well, how often do you hear people, when somebody died, they lent into someone else and they developed a really strong relationship with that person, right? Mm-hmm. That's a silver lining, right? Yes, this shitty thing happened, but here's the good that came of it. Or, somebody died and I realized that that life is short and I just need to go and do this shit that I've always been putting off, right? Yeah. That's a massive silver lining, right? So one of the key messages, I think, for this long-term strategy, particularly anybody who's got any type of trauma, is to be a silver lining hunter. Yep. You got to always hunt for the silver lining. And then James Gross has shown you can use that same technique and use it in the moment. So when something shitty is happening to you, you can actually go, what might the silver lining be 6 months down the track, right? And that actually can change your psychology quite significantly. So I would add to what you said about that is look for that silver lining, which is hugely, hugely important.
Yeah, it's so important. That's why I think of, because it's so easy, I think, as human beings to not go to our wounds, to repress them, to avoid them, to deny them. And we're basically wired to not go there in a way to protect ourselves. But that perspective is the only thing that's actually got me through facing them, is saying, the more I face this, the more I can tolerate this uncomfortable sensation, the more I can condition myself to not have it be a thing anymore in the future. It's like I know I'm getting closer and closer to being free of it eventually. So it's like the more you face it, the closer you are to personal freedom. That's whenever I see a trigger and I don't want to face it, I tell myself, the more I don't face this, the lesser the likelihood is of me not becoming free of it. It's just that perspective of saying, like, this is an opportunity for me to free myself of something that's causing suffering. And actually, the more I feel it, the more I allow myself to go there, not overindulgence of being a victim, but just not resisting it. Over time, it stops being a thing, in my experience. It takes a while, but through patience and through repetition, over time, you get to a place where you're like, okay, this is less intense. It's not fucking with me anymore. I can do this.
That's right. And you said a couple of really important things there that I want to pick up on. And the Stoic philosophers, let's go back to those. So if anybody's seen the movie Gladiator, the emperor at the start of that was Marcus Aurelius, right? Yeah. Who is it was a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. And the Stoics would say that when you face big challenges, if it's something that you really struggle to deal with, that challenge just becomes an opportunity to strengthen your character or to practice a virtue, right? So whether I'm practice the virtue of patience or tolerance or whatever it may be. But here's the other thing that's really important. When we talk about character comes from the Greek word, the old Greek word, meaning the mark of a chisel, right? And I just want you to think about that for a second, and your listeners to think about that. Nobody developed good character by having a fucking easy life, right? Sure. You develop character from the mark of a chisel. You develop character by getting those knocks, right? So it's an opportunity, and let's pull this together with the work from James Gross and that silver lining, is actually looking back on that shitty, challenging childhood that people had, or that traumatic event, and actually going, well, shit, that was friggin' awful, but Jesus, did that strengthen me? That has actually shaped my character, and I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that, right? It is from those marks of the chisel that I actually shape myself. And I think, to combine with this, I always like to say to people, the first principle that you need to have in life is not we've all been sold this thing that I should be happy, and we've been marketed to hell around happiness. And when people aren't happy, it makes them further unhappy. We got to put that shit in the bin. Here's the first principle. Life is fucking hard, right? And if we start from that first principle, life is hard and you are not entitled to anything. Life is hard, but you better roll your sleeves up and get on with shit and not be a victim, right? And all of these knocks that you have had in your life are just an opportunity to sharpen your character. Those marks of a chisel actually prepare you for facing future events. So it's actually taking all that bad shit that I either avoid or I go back and it makes me sad, or it triggers me to think about it, is to actually reframe that as preparation for future battles in life that you will face. And the Stoics actually said that you should wish upon your enemy every comfort in life because it's going to weaken them.
Yeah, we're in a space now, there's some good in it. The new generation where we're becoming very open and vocal about how we feel, but that lends this new movement of, over victimization, where people just get too obsessive with their pain and their struggles and their tribulations. And so, and there's part of that's good for me in a way, because we're facing the pain that's stuck in our bodies. But the problem that we're talking about now is that you're doing so without any intention to be in forward motion. That there's a difference between being a victim and being stuck in the past versus identifying your struggles, identifying your limitations, and using that to push you in forward motion. It's a very different thing that people have to understand when they're going through this process. It's two very different things.
Absolutely. And a lot of that comes down to the mindset, right?
Yeah.
Yes, this bad thing has happened to me, or it is happening to me now. So how am I actually going to use that right now? And that actually leads me into the second story about when I've had to use this gremlin in Sage. And it's actually been quite recently. So my little guy, Oscar, who's 12 years old, got diagnosed quite recently with Cushing's disease, which is a very serious and potentially fatal disease. And it takes quite a while to diagnose it. And we had noticed that he had stopped growing. As a 12-year-old, you shouldn't be stopped growing. And his mood had changed massively. He'd gone from this like really bright spark, like funny little guy, and just got more and more serious and started to become depressed. And then he developed a moon face. And I realized, particularly when he saw the moon face, I thought, shit, that's cortisol. Just because of the work that I do, I'm so familiar with the stress hormone cortisol. And so we took him to the doctor, went to go to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician kind of brushed it off. And I went, no, I want his cortisol tested. And they tested his cortisol and it was through the roof. And so he had to then go and do a series of tests. And then they diagnosed it as Cushing's disease, which is caused by a brain tumor on the pituitary gland, right? And you have to then have an operation, a neurosurgery to remove that brain tumor. And there's a fair amount of risks involved in that operation. And sometimes it resolves completely. Sometimes it doesn't resolve, and they face a challenging life. And so that was pretty challenging for us to deal with as a parent. Like any parent will know, watching your kids' mental health degrade and actually knowing that they have some sort of a serious disease is one of the most challenging things. And we, both me and my wife, Carly, and Oscar, we use Stoic philosophy to help us get through. And for me and my wife, we used basically Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, said that, and I'll paraphrase him, he was basically saying, life is hard and you will get a shit sandwich to eat. The universe doesn't really care about you. Bad stuff will happen, but you need to play your given roles well, right? So Epictetus himself was beaten by his Roman master to the point where he became a cripple. And he said, well, if it's my destiny to become a cripple, I'm going to be the best damn cripple that I can possibly be. So we as parents went, how can we be the best parents that we can be? Rather than going, why is this disease that's 1 in 10 million in kids? Why has it happened to Oscar playing the victim? How can we be the best parents that we can be? Like, how can we support our little guy through it? And for Oscar, it was, okay, I've got Cushing's disease. How can I be the best Cushing's disease patient that there's ever been, right? And he just said, I'm going to out-exercise this thing, right? Because it causes weight gain and diabetes. And it didn't in him because he was so determined, right? But the other thing that was really important is this whole idea that everything in your life is in 2 zones. So this is, again, Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher. He says zone 1 and zone 2. He said zone 1 is the stuff that is within your control, such as your belief systems, what you choose to be afraid of, the thoughts that you linger on, but your actions, your behaviors, and especially how you choose to react to your circumstances, right? And zone 2 is everything else. What people think about you, what they say about you, COVID-19, getting a chronic disease, somebody abusing you, this stuff that we do not control. And that is zone 2. And Epictetus says the most important thing when we're faced with challenges is we must focus on that which we can control, zone 1, and refuse to invest our energy in the stuff that we can't control.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people, they invest their energy in the stuff that they can't control. They get angry, they get bitter, they get frustrated, they get resentful. Whereas the key thing that we can focus on, and even in the shittest situation, you can still choose how you react to your circumstances.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. Everybody gets to choose how they react to their circumstances. So if we pull all of this together and the gremlin and the sage, when you wake up in the morning, you get to choose who gets out of bed to face the world. Everybody gets to choose whether the gremlin is going to be in their head all day and they're going to play the victim and be grumpy and all of this, or whether their best self, whether their sage is going to face that day. And when they face challenges, we all get to choose whether the gremlin fronts up, plays the victim, gets angry, looks for someone to blame, or whether your sage is going to front up and say, okay, how do I get solution focused? And even when it's a really shitty challenge, how do I use this challenge to sharpen my character or to practice a virtue, right? And that's really, really important, I think, pulling that all together like that.
That's a devastating situation, man. My heart goes out to you, and I want to stay on that for a bit. How can you be with all that pain, all that uncertainty, in such a hard time, yet still be fully present with me right now, be fully present with your responsibilities? How do you navigate that line of being amidst a deeply painful situation while also staying in the present moment when we now are present with the work you're doing? That's pretty hard for people.
Look, it is challenging. And the key thing, I think if we get back to the gremlin and the sage and this whole idea about these negative emotions, which are always there, right? It's about whether or not you choose to focus on the negative emotions. We all get to choose where we focus our attention.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just about a shifting of attention, because it's about accepting. A huge part of this is just about acceptance. And that's, part of acceptance commitment therapy. Yeah. Is that you accept that bad shit happens, but then you commit to action that is linked to your values. So this is really, really important. So what are my values and how do I do action that is linked to those values? And there's this beautiful term in Japanese psychology. And my wife's a practitioner in Japanese psychology, so that's helped us. And there's this beautiful term called arugamama. And it means with things as they are, what needs to be done right now. Right? So you just accept that there's all this shit going on, but what do I need to do? Right? And those actions what do I need to do to actually take me towards the person that I want to be, or to help this individual. Now, I should say this story has got a good outcome because Oscar had neurosurgery 4 days ago.
Mhm.
They found the tumor, they took the tumor out, and we can see that his spark is coming back. Now, there's going to be a bit of a recovery, but I just want to let know that it has been a good outcome. But it was challenging. We can't say it wasn't challenging, but all of us got through it. And Oscar particularly, we were visiting his life. We're walking it with him, but he's living it. And having a 12-year-old use the principles of Stoic philosophy to actually get through this, to focus on what he can control, to not be the victim, to be the best Cushing's patient that he can possibly be.
Yeah.
And of course he had those moments, but he also understands that character is about the mark of a chisel. Yeah. And that getting through this will give him this set of armor that he can take into the rest of his life.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And observing you, I notice a laser focus, super strong. That's not easy for most people. How did you get to a point where you could be so focused, so present? That's probably the biggest life skill I think out of anything someone can cultivate, is this true presence and focus in whatever they're doing.
Again, it comes back to the Stoic philosophers, and I don't know if you can see this tattoo right here.
Memento Mori.
Memento Mori.
Yeah.
That I got done recently. So that came from the Stoic philosophers. Memento Mori, and Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, said to himself, Marcus, Memento Mori, remember that you are mortal, that you could die at any point. And he said, remember that, Marcus, not to be morose, but to remind yourself that life is a precious gift and that you should wake up every single day with extreme gratitude just to be alive. And you should use that thought, memento mori, to judge your behaviors and your actions that day. That, for me, this memento mori has had a pretty profound impact on my life. I used to have it on my bathroom mirror. And I can guarantee you, you don't have to go and get a tattoo on it. I got a tattoo recently because it was so helpful. Like just waking up every morning and going, you know what? I'm still alive and Oscar is still alive, right? This disease hasn't killed him. Yeah. I'm so fucking grateful. I'm so grateful about that. And if your listeners wake up every day and just look at their mirror and go, how fucking awesome is it just to be alive? Like, how awesome is that? You just need to look at what's going on in Ukraine, Somalia, go and look at what's happening in Burma right now, right? The persecution of people. And it's, if you start with that attitude, right? And we couple with this, with what I said earlier on, life is friggin' hard. And you know what? It is awesome to be alive. And when you have real gratitude to be alive, those challenges, like that dickhead that I have to deal with today that's stressing me out, is no longer like that. It's, I get to have to deal with that dickhead because I'm alive. Like, what's the alternative, right? If you start everything from those principles of life is hard and I need to be really grateful every day just to be alive, it's an absolute game changer. I tell you, and it's not that I'm now suffering this. It's that I get to go through this challenge because I'm alive.
The key concept you highlighted there is to be grateful for even your problems. I think that's a powerful perspective, because I've been in, my story is, I've been in times where it was just desolate, like nothing good, and I almost had no problems. It was just like pure despair and victimhood. And now I'm in a space where I'll catch the gremlin complaining about like all these problems that I have with my with work and whatever that comes with that. I get stressed out. I'm like, just remember when you didn't have these problems, when you had nothing fucking going for you. And immediately my heart opens up. I'm like, wow, thank God I have these fucking problems. Because one, I wouldn't want anyone else's, and two, it's much better to have these than to have none, to just be, a nihilist, just, walking in despair.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. And a lot of it is about how we choose to frame these situations that we have in life, right? And that framing is massively, massively important. And I think looking back on bad shit that's happened in your past is just a mark of a chisel. And it's about how do I use that mark of a chisel? How do I turn that into armor that I can use in the future? But coupled with that whole idea that you need to be grateful for every moment that you're alive, because you know what? Life is friggin' tough and bad shit happens to good people.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do?
To wrap this up and end with one powerful question that people can apply to their lives. I'm a little spiritual, so I believe in mantras. I believe in in repeating something in your mind over and over again to condition and frame your perspective of the world. Is that go-to mental framework for you? Has it just become a memento mori? Is there some other perspective you have that you continuously come back to in a moment to align yourself with your values? Like, what's that go-to framework for you? Is it just memento mori?
No, I've got three actually.
Okay.
So one is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Because that is the stuff that I think that is the attitude that we need to have in life is actually leaning in to the discomfort. The second is memento mori, and the third is to be a silver lining hunter, right? To hunt for the silver lining in the bad shit that happened in the past. And when bad shit happens to you, to look at it and hunt for the silver lining. I think if you combine, or certainly for me, having those three combined, lean into the discomfort, right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that is what is going to chisel you and chisel your character. To hunt for the silver lining in the bad situation, and to be extremely grateful every day just to be alive. I think for me, that combination has worked beautifully. And I'm a big fan of mantras as well, and that spiritual side. And you don't need to be religious to be spiritual. This is the thing for people to understand. But feeling that you are part of something that is bigger than yourself is hugely, hugely important. And I guess the other thing that I would leave your listeners with is that when you're feeling shit house, is to try to look out rather than look in. We spend far too much time, particularly in Western civilizations, self-focused. And all psychology is about self-focus, right? And about, oh, poor you, and life should be better and stuff like that. When the shit has hit the fan, is just look outward and look outward. How can I be a better person? How can I go and help somebody else, even though I'm having a shitty time for myself? Because when you are more outward focused than inward focused, it becomes an absolute game changer.
For sure, man. So powerful. Go ahead.
And that helps with the spiritual side of things, right? So if people are listening and going, I'm not religious and I'm not spiritual, what's going to work for me? I say to them, well, you got to think about a purpose. Everybody needs a purpose, right? And most people get too caught up in purpose. It's not about fucking changing the world. How can you make your little corner of the universe better for you having been in it? That's it. That is your purpose, whether that is about being a great mom, being a great dad, or being a great friend or a community member. And because the Stoics, and we'll leave it on this, that they said that the key thing for eudaimonia, which is a life of flourishing or fulfillment, which is much better and more sustainable than happiness, right? The key thing for eudaimonia is arete, which is your character. It's that knowing that you're doing the right thing in any circumstances, that you're doing good even when no one is listening. That gives you that sense of purpose and pride and connection to others that I think is really important if people aren't spiritual.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there too, that spirituality doesn't mean, you're praising God or looking at the stars. To me, it means that you're giving yourself to something bigger than you, always. And that could just be a purpose. So, thank you so much for coming on the show, brother. And shout out, where can people find you and in your work? Yeah.
Yeah, probably the easiest thing for people to find. So two things: my website, mindbodybrain.com.au, and my podcast. So I get to interview lots of cool people. You'll know what it's like on a podcast. It's pretty cool getting to interview people and distilling some of that knowledge. So my podcast is the Mind Body Brain Project podcast. Bit of a mouthful, but there you go.
Amazing, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and all the insights you gave me and the audience. So thank you. I hope you have a great day, brother.
Thank you, Lucas. And you know what? Keep doing what you're doing because it's important shit.
You too, man. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, man.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to watch more content, click this video right here. And please don't forget to subscribe right here. Thank you.